Rush Duel Links World Championship Qualifiers 2025 have just concluded, and they were a bit of a mixed bag. So I've never really been a big fan of the WCQ or the GRF or Goha Rush festivals, mostly because committing 3 entire days to an event is quite frankly ridiculous. But I do still enjoy competing in them for a bit of fun and to get some decent testing and practice against like-minded, competitive-minded people. So going into this WCQ, we were in a 3-deck meta. We have Light Galaxy Fusion, we have Dark Galaxy Fusion, and we have Spellcaster Fusion. Now, there are a couple of other decks on the peripheral, and we'll go through some of those as well. But for now, just to get an idea of what the meta is going into this, we're going to cover these 3 decks primarily. So Light Galaxy, this was predicted to be the strongest deck coming into this event. In point battles, this deck has been dominant. In tournaments, this deck has been dominant. I think it goes without saying this is the strongest deck of the format at the moment. This deck has above average consistency and an above average ceiling, which does allow it to make these ridiculous plays and can just kill your opponent out of nowhere. Very, very strong deck and definitely the front runner going in. The next best deck was probably Dark Galaxy Fusion, which had a lot worse consistency. I would argue it had quite poor consistency. The skill didn't really offer a ton. Like, the skill was still really, really helpful. I don't want to undersell it, but it didn't do as much as the Light Galaxy skill. And the deck had a ridiculous ceiling, right? The ceiling of Dark Galaxy, in my opinion, was a lot higher than Light Galaxy. Dark Galaxy is able to just wipe the board and then just attack your opponent for lethal through basically anything. And if they're unable to find Apocalypse, they can still go for Chrysaor Turbo. They can also do various other combo plays, such as Protostar into Theogonia into Chrysaor, build a ridiculous board, and just like we say, just kill your opponent out of nowhere. So Dark Galaxy, again, a bit more high roll, but a lot higher ceiling, very, very powerful. Then we had Spellcasters, which had arguably the best consistency. We had 9 cards in the deck that would trigger the skill. We have plenty of ways to plus. The skill is a +1 every turn. We have things like the Strange Witch, which can give you that +2. Like, the deck does quite a lot, but in order to go into its bosses, it required quite high investment. So although you were plussing quite a lot, you weren't necessarily translating that into like a ridiculous board. This deck, again, great consistency, but poor ceiling. This deck oftentimes would struggle to close the game in a single turn, whereas Light and Dark Galaxy could OTK your opponent quite consistently. If we were to talk about the next best decks out of these 3, the next best one is probably Dark Galaxy with the Tearfing skill, which is the equipped spell that gives an attack boost and piercing. This deck basically is just Chrysaor Turbo. The objective is to get triple attack with Chrysaor, give it piercing an extra 400 attack, and ideally attack over a bunch of defense position monsters and OTK your opponent. Don't forget, Chrysaor can attack directly as well. So if we get 2 other monsters next to Chrysaor, that's 5 attacks we're getting with piercing, which is really, really strong. I would say this deck has not the best consistency and not the best ceiling, because realistically we're just going to try and cheese wins, but this deck can still steal wins out of nowhere, and probably the 4th best deck coming in. Then the last deck we'll talk about is Chaos Galaxy. This is just Light Galaxy mixed with Dark Galaxy. This deck has kind of the strengths of Light and Dark Galaxy, but it's been seen to be a little bit more inconsistent than Light Galaxy, for example. But it does have that Apocalypse and Dark Hole device to, again, just blow up your opponent's board and then attack in for game. So you can kind of look at this as Dark Galaxy Light. But those are the decks that we were expecting to see going into this weekend. So I decided to play Light Galaxy. I've been playing in a handful of tournaments over the previous week. I topped in 2 of them and I managed to win another. So I felt quite confident in the deck and my ability to play it. Day 1 actually went very well. I started 11 hours after the WCQ started, and we only did end up playing for about 4 hours, but in that time we did have a lot of very good games. The standouts for the Light Galaxy deck for me were Eve, who could turbo through the deck, finding Oblivion, Plora, Fusion, Linak, etc, etc. It was just really, really good at just finding all the combo pieces that we'd need, whilst also filling the graveyard for effects like Plora and Eternal, so really, really, really good. It was another great standout card, being able to use it to fill the graveyard, and then Leica, who was able to give us that piercing, which really allowed the deck to come together. A lot of players had dropped Meteor Charge entirely, or cut it to a single copy, because having 1 less spell in the deck really improves consistency and helps you get more monsters in the graveyard for Eternal, and in the mirror, you either need to get a big chunk of damage in first, or fill your graveyard with so many monsters that you can OTK with your Eternal through anything. Matchup-wise, Spellcasters felt like free wins. We dropped one game to Spellcasters all weekend, and it was because we hard-bricked. Otherwise, I felt like we were quite confident into that deck. Dark Galaxy was the most frustrating matchup because they could just kill you through any board. So a lot of the time you'd want to just put 3 big guys on the board if possible, and that would basically guarantee that you're not going to die, you're not going to take a ridiculous amount of damage from either Spellcasters or Light Galaxy. But if you're against Dark Galaxy and they just activate Dark Hole Device, they can just kill you through that, which is not the best feeling in the world. There are plenty of trap cards that you can use to stop Dark Galaxy, but the issue is they are next to useless against both of the other 2 decks, and since Light Galaxy was the most popular by far, it meant that including these traps for the Dark Galaxy matchup was ill-advised because you're only going to play against Dark Galaxy a fraction of the time. Regardless, we only dropped 1 game to Dark Galaxy day 1. We had 5 hard brick games, so basically just opened unplayable. Somehow we still managed to win 2 of them, so we only actually had 3 losses because of bricks, which was quite good. Because of this, I managed to maintain above an 80% win rate, which I was very, very happy about. I ended the first day with 20,000 points and sat in 7th place for EU and around 50th place global. So going into day 2, I had fully expected to have fallen from grace and been overtaken, but to my surprise, 14 hours after I had stopped climbing, I was somehow still top 10 EU, which was a great start to the day. The games, however, did not go so well. I only had around an hour to play and managed to go fairly even. It felt like all of my luck had been used up day 1, and almost every game was a brick. A few of the games I won were only because my opponent wouldn't see the lethal line or they were too wary of my set cards to really commit. My win rate against Dark Galaxy got a lot worse as well, with them just finding combo on turn 2 or 3 and OTKing me. As for Spellcasters, they started experimenting with some interesting techs to keep up with the Galaxy lists. Phantom Bind was the most prevalent and could cheese wins if the opponent didn't expect it and didn't play around it. My win rate was still decent though, still above 70%, and we ended at around 22,000. But before we talk about day 3, I wanted to talk a little bit about the community and what was happening outside of the game. I'm in a ton of Rush Duel Links related Discord servers that were all extremely active throughout the weekend. Players were voicing their elation at milling a fusion with extra Plora and the frustrations of their opponent hitting them with a Dark Hole Device on turn 2. It was so much fun chatting with players both in text and voice channels, and I think this is really what elevated this experience for me, just having so many fun and interesting people to share it with. There were some woes, some people on losing streaks feeling down, but the community would rally together to offer words of encouragement in a truly touching demonstration of compassion and empathy. But there were also highs, with players pulling off ridiculous plays and going on insane win streaks, and again, the other players were there every step of the way. Apart from being really fun, this also allowed players to share their experiences, such as one player encountering Santa Mill, some interesting tech such as TSA in Light Galaxy, and finally, a new meta threat that was seemingly terrorizing the latter half of day 3. So, day 3 comes around. I was extremely busy on the 3rd day, but I did manage to chat to some people for a bit. It turns out they were encountering a sleeper deck that most players had already written off. I queued up to my first game on the 1st day, and what do I see? Udius. Yep, it's just Udius. Nothing special. Light Galaxy is the obvious best deck and the most popular. It's what we played against the most, so nothing really that interesting until Dark Prophet hits the board. This wasn't Light Galaxy, this was Chaos Galaxy. Chaos Galaxy took the 3rd day by storm. It's hard to know how widespread the deck had become, but I was hearing reports from multiple players that they had played against it or had even started playing it themselves. The theory is simple. The Dark Galaxy deck is very random, and the skill isn't ideal since it doesn't give you any advantage. Also, a lot of players stopped playing Universal Storm, so the deck would just pray that their opponent had no traps. So you take the best parts from Dark Galaxy, which is Dark Hole Device and Apocalypse, and you throw them into the Light Galaxy deck, which had a skill that pluses, Plasma to pop back row, Plora to find extra resources, etc, etc. Now, I was very busy and didn't even get to start playing until 10:30 PM here, so I only played my 4 games for the daily rewards. But all 4 of those games were against Chaos Galaxy, and we did win 3 out of 4 of them. Technically, I still had 6 hours left until the event ended, so I had the chance to grind points and try to go for a decent placement. But going into the event, I knew my playtime would be limited, so I had no prior goal I was aiming to achieve. I also think that because I wasn't going for a world spot or a silver icon, I felt no pressure, no stress, just hanging out with my friends and playing the game that I love. My experience with the WCQ was fantastic. I had great games, I got to spend some time with some great people, and I think I'm actually going to really miss this experience. But it has made me really excited for the next GRF. And with that, my WCQ experience had come to an end. I went to bed 6 hours before the end of the event. I was just outside of top 10 EU, but I was content. I was happy with my performance, and I can't wait to go next.